What's going on? This is Bobby J with City Chapters Podcast. On today's chapter, we got Austin Dannen. Austin Dannen is the executive director of Peak 7, a nonprofit that provides outdoor adventure experiences that engages people, primarily youth, but it challenges them spiritually, physically, mentally, and emotionally to help them realize a greater potential. Peak 7 offers adventures such as backpacking, mountaineering, rafting, which is a trip I got to go on with them on the Spokane River with Whitworth International. Austin had me on, and he wanted me to experience a trip with them, and that was just a cool experience with those students. They also offer climbing, stand-up paddleboarding, and snowshoeing. So that's kind of the little intro I have for Austin and Peak 7, and we're just going to get into more of the story here and what Peak 7 really does is Austin will take us through it.
Yeah.
What's going on, man?
No, it's good. No, it's summer is just definitely ramping up a ton. So we got all the guides. We have about 14 to 18 guides, a lot of volunteers, and just people who love the outdoors and have a heart for youth in our community. We mostly primarily partner with organizations instead of just working with individual students. Like, hey, you want to have an awesome experience,
Right.
yeah, and stuff like that. And so we'll instead call maybe Cup of Cool Water or someone who has a existing relationship with an organization, Street Youth Ministries over in Seattle.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing too is just trust. We really want to provide. Kind of break down those barriers for the outdoor experience. And so for kids that are thinking about going, it's like, that isn't something I really do, or even just vulnerability kind of in that space. And so for a leader who's actually works with them and knows them to be able to like share that experience with them of like, I don't know, like that whitewater rafting, that sounds really scary. Like that's not our kind of thing, you know, that's not what we do. That's a white people thing, you know, and they're a leader saying, hey, no, you can trust me. You can trust these guys and just having this amazing experience. So we primarily partner with organizations and just kind of like help them alongside instead of a youth leader needing to go out and get backpacks and stoves and wilderness first responder certifications, trainings. They can come to us and it's just like, hey, what can you afford towards the cost? Here's the cost of the trip. We want to provide these opportunities for all youth in the Northwest. Mm-hmm. You know, what can you afford towards the cost of your trip? So that's really what we do. We work in Spokane, Oregon, and Seattle right now. And it was started 2005, 2006. A guy named Brian Kerrigan just had a huge heart for the outdoors and just saw kids along the river not really enjoying the outdoors for what that was, just a lot of hypodermic needles, breaking bottles, and like, hey, I wonder if we can give a new perspective of the outdoors and what that is.
Yeah, what it can be to actually hang out at the river, be on the river instead of kind of what was going on. It still does, you know.
Oh yeah. No, I work with a lot of organizations, or like we work with the Teen Challenge, and like, whoa, this is the first time I'm down by the river, having fun and not being high, or experiencing real laughter. It's like, oh, you know, not fake high laughter, but real laughter, and just be able to recreate and be a part of the outdoors, being part of a community without having to use and stuff like that is really eye opening for a lot of our community members who join.
Yeah, I think what you guys offer is amazing, as I've shared with you before. And the reason I reached out is because one of the things that I've been saying on the podcast is that I want to have people that are running nonprofits on here to give them a voice. And, you know, just help share the message. Not like I have a huge platform yet, but, you know, I think that any amount helps with getting the word out there. And, you know, hopefully the aim is that one day this podcast will be a big platform and people can backtrack and look at older episodes and then, you know, maybe find out in the future about Peak 7.
Yeah.
and I know I have a decent base, so thank you to everybody that does listen. But one of the biggest things about what I want to do with city chapters is really get myself acquainted with people that are really doing great work in our city and in our area, and just in the world in general. But, starting off here is where I need to be, and knowing and getting to sit and talk with people such as yourself that are really investing their life into helping the community, not just hoping it was better, but they're actually doing things to make it better. It's really important for me to learn from you, because I want city chapters to have that dynamic to it. And I'm trying to learn how to go about doing that the right way. And people like you can kind of show me that path. So, it's really cool. Like when I reached out to you, I think the first time that I heard about Peak 7, I believe, was through my friend Joel Barber. Shout out to Joel, runs the great P&W. He had done something with you guys, and he told me about what you guys do, and I was like, oh, that's awesome. Like getting kids that wouldn't have that opportunity, to go out into nature, into the wild, and have like a full experience based upon whether it's backpacking or rafting, like nature and being out in nature, hiking, backpacking, camping, all that kind of stuff has changed my life, and it helps a lot of the pain that comes from being in our society all the time kind of wash away for that time you're out there, and like that's really one of the only places I really do find that kind of natural peace, that natural healing, instead of reverting to alcohol to get away, or these other substances that we try to use to distract ourselves. Something about being in nature is just healing. And, that you guys are providing that is so important to kids that may have never had that opportunity otherwise if your organization didn't exist.
Yeah.
And so,
No, it's
I'm just happy to, that you guys do exist. Like those kids, the students that we went out with, a lot of them had never done something like that before, being that they were from all sorts of different countries, and probably, again, white people don't really do these kinds of things where they're from, but they had a blast. I had a blast. I was having a ball, with you guys. So.
That's why I wanted you to be able to see firsthand. I think like hearing about it or thinking about it, but being able to see maybe the nervousness of stepping into the raft. It's cold, on the Spokane River, but just seeing the genuine connection and the smiles and the confidence and in those outdoor spaces, and like what you shared about of just having an opportunity to reset on your perspective in the outdoors. I just got an email from just one of the organization leaders in Seattle, working with youth and inner city youth in Seattle. And it's like, man, it was just really good to get out and just reset and take a breath. And I think that's what the outdoors provides. And a lot of people just are looking for that, but it can be very disconnected to outdoor places. And so being able to say, wow, when the phone batteries die and kids are bored, and it's like, I've never experienced boredom before. And just being able to sit and think and look, or we'll do things called sharing our life stories on backpacking trips, and just like giving them kind of a platform to share and for them to kind of process, not in a counseling way, but just them to share a little bit of their story. As you see the coastal trails, like one of my favorite places, and watching the sun set into the ocean, campfire there, and maybe kind of giving kids a space to start unpacking a little bit of their story in a safer place where people are listening and really care. It's just a really powerful to be able to have those kind of conversations and come alongside. So
yeah, it's true. Like it's amazing sometimes the conversations that will come up when you're in a place like that don't really happen the same way, and they just don't have the same power as they do when you're in nature around a campfire or whatever it is, and really digging into some things that maybe are going on that you really don't know how to express until you're in that kind of a setting almost. So, Yeah. So let's transition to more of your backstory and how you even ended up at Peak Seven. So I read online you were born in Spokane,
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah. I was born and raised in Spokane. I really enjoyed and loved the outdoors. Um, but I have like a limp, and so I walk with a
Mm,
limp. I had a lot of surgeries through 11 years old to about 17 years old, in and out of Shriners Hospital, those kind of things. And so, but I loved being in the outdoors, even though I couldn't recreate maybe at the same level.
mm,
I grew up out in the country and just wanted to be able to provide this, seeing the power of that experience and wanting to provide that for others. And so I went looking through the degrees at Eastern, like, okay, I'm going to Eastern, let's look through degrees. Like, oh, geology, that sounds kind of cool. And I was like,
yeah.
outdoor recreation, like that's a degree. So I called the professor at the time, told him a little bit of my story. And he was pretty skeptical with my physical limitations of just like, I don't know, like this
Mm,
probably isn't the best. But I really had a heart, even at that time, to like, I want to take youth into the outdoors. Like, I want to work with youth. I want to work in the outdoors. So I joined the outdoor recreation program, worked there for, uh, graduated, went to Germany for my internship, and was offered a job working at the Air Force, working with the Air Force kids, but just saw it as like climbing the ladder and saw that kind of thing. And I wanted more, I wanted a more lasting impact. Like what I want to do is be able to have more lasting impact in the community, and just the the environment on the base and youth programs that I experienced was just getting to the next level, kissing up to your boss, like, oh, this person's leaving, I wonder who's going to get their job. I was like, I don't want to just climb the ladder. I want to make a real difference. And so
mm,
went to actually back to Spokane, and I went back to Spokane and worked at like an auto shop for a while. They wanted me to work there, and I said, no, it's not, what I want to do, but it's just temporary. And then heard about a job at the Union Gospel Mission working at their camp. Loved working at the camp, and it was more of a maintenance kind of thing. Hit my ceiling there, and kind of came to a point like, hey, this is not where God's calling me of like continuing on this path. I need to be working with people more. And so it was kind of like in the fall is when those seasonal jobs, you have to decide to stay another year or not. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to quit this amazing job working at the camp, and find something else. And a lot of people started like, hey, Peak Seven's hiring. Peak Seven's hiring. And people warned me like, don't work at a small nonprofit. You'll work and work into the ground. And you'll get absolutely nothing. You'll get just burnt out and spent and done. But the more I heard about it, I was like, and more people called me like, hey, there's a job at Peak Seven. So I met Ryan, went through an interview, shook his hand, and started as a coordinator in 2009. And then just ever since then, it's been going to Seattle, helped starting up the Seattle branch, came back to Spokane, took over programs, and now executive director. So kind of been through watching it and looking at that, now kind of guiding it to that next chapter for Peak Seven. So yeah, that's a little
mm,
bit of a very brief overview of my story.
yeah. Um, did you have like a specific experience growing up that kind of like intrigued you with the outdoors? Do you
Yeah.
have like a certain moment?
No, one of the things I love asking is like people who are on those on trips of like just like a favorite outdoor memory, and
Yeah.
how memories and outdoor experiences can be really pivotal in our lives. And so I want to love providing that for kids, being able to have these formative outdoor experiences. But no, I do. Two kind of things that really stuck out with me is with my dad. My dad was a farm boy. He wanted to be a farmer, and um, and he was had a eye disease basically and was going blind and couldn't knew he
Mm,
couldn't be a farmer. And so um, he was like white cane, like 100% pretty much blind as his retina deteriorated. And he knew that I was going to go through Shriners and go through a lot, and he wanted to have a really an amazing experience, something that we did together. And so he had a friend of his who had horses, and he took us up in the Cascades on horseback. And I just heard it's really a pivotal memory of seeing fear of like riding a horse on what in my opinion back then was like a cliff edge, and getting freaked out and having to overcome those fears, being able to wake up in the morning and pick huckleberries next to deer and put them in my pancakes, go fishing, and just really spending that time with my dad. And then as my dad got later in life, developed cancer, and going through chemo, we kind of knew it wasn't looking too good. And so his friends like, hey, let's do another horse packing trip. And we went up to Mount Rainier area, went elk hunting. It was a complete like disaster. The horse rolled over my dad and his friend, and there was like forest fires. The horses got away. But I will like those memories and those times, even though it's absolutely miserable. Like, what are we doing? Like taking a blind man in chemotherapy way up in the mountains. But I look back at that time and remember those memories of like Sufferfest or really challenging are gonna stick with me for a lifetime. So there's something about outdoor memories that just really stick with you of that experience. It's not like I always talk to kids of like, hey, going to Silverwood is lots of fun. And you're going to kind of remember that. But when you think about those backpacking trips where it rained and you forgot something or something like that, and you're out there just suffering, you're going to remember a lot more of those details than maybe like the most fun amusement park or something like that.
I agree. Yeah. There's, the suffering that you have to go through sometimes in the outdoors for the reward. Sometimes you don't even get the reward, like you're saying. As far as like what we perceive that reward hopefully to be, which is like essentially like coming out of that trip, like that was an amazing experience or a memory. But sometimes like you're saying, those formative memories and the ones that stick the most are memories that you had a struggle in the outdoors. And there's something about when you struggle in the outdoors and you make it through, the strength that you gain from it about yourself. Like, I made it through that, and now you have this heightened more confidence of what you're really capable of because you put yourself in a vulnerable situation. Every time you're really in the outdoors, you're putting yourself essentially in a vulnerable situation. And the more skills that you gain through training and stuff, the safer you can be. But there's no guarantees out there. There's so many variables.
And you need it. I mean, part of that is having adventure. And so we talk about safety or risk, not as the enemy of like, the risk is a bad thing, but risk is essential to what we do. I remember one time I was taking a student. It was a group of kids, an open enrollment trip, one of the few that we do. And one of the kids is from my youth group, just had a really challenging story. And I was like, hey, you should come on this Peak 7 backpacking trip. And you could tell he really longed for adventure and greatness and significance in his life. And he wasn't able to live that out. He tried through video games or how he talked. But yeah, it was just really challenging for him. And so I remember one of the trails we did up in the Cascades, and there's two different ways to get to the summit. And we took one of this, like basically a natural stone bridge. It was a slab of granite that had fallen in a saddle, and you walk across and it's just straight down either side, and it's kind of exposed. And so we take the kids up that, and it's just straight down, getting up to the summit, and then we walk off the easy way. And when the student realized, he's like, why in the world would we, if this route was available all the time, how would we take the more risky, route?
Yeah.
And so you're kind of just able to process like our need for adventure and risk, and not just, I talked to a friend who like free soloed, and I was asking him about risk, and he's like, it's not about the adrenaline rush. It's about the simplicity of life. When you're in those situations, all that matters is that next move. And so, all your other stuff at home or wherever falls away. It's just you and that next step,
Yeah.
kind of thing. And so for him to experience that life of all this stuff with his family and hurt, not that it goes away, but it gives you a chance to step back and get perspective. Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. I think it's just too a way that like I forget sometimes how healing it is to get outdoors. You forget, you get caught up in life again, you get caught up with business and different things, and the best medicine that for me,
Yeah.
and I think it's true for a lot of people that have experienced it, is if you get outdoors, like you said, those things kind of just, they don't matter as much. They may still be there, but it kind of helps you reset and look at them from a different point of view of like, I've been really letting these things get to me or bother me a lot, but really in the scheme of things, these things aren't really that bad, Now I can't speak for everybody, but most of the time that's true for me when I get outdoors. The things that I'm stressing about in my life in the city or whatever, as soon as I get out, I'm like, why do I even care about that stuff? And it just kind of washes it away for some time. But you got to continually get that cleansing, and so, I have to remind myself if I'm stressed out, like, dude, you got to take a break, go hiking,
Yeah.
do something like that just to get out and kind of cleanse away the stress of the city life.
No, I would agree. Even like the way that as I was thinking about like what that means to get a reset and perspective and problems not going away. I feel like sometimes some of the problems and the things that we think are big really fall away, and some of the things that are really big and should be big, we're kind of left to continue to work with, but in that environment where you can see like this outdoor space and the grandness of that, of like, wow, someone like I believe like someone made this and that person like cares deeply about me, in those situations. That's really, really powerful. I remember one time I did a father-son trip with my dad. My mom was going through, cancer, and it's easy to just have to, work through like,
You said your mom was going through
yeah,
cancer as
it's
well?
been a lot. It's a
Yeah,
little
yeah,
bit of,
okay, yeah.
yeah. And so it was a different portion of my life. And my dad and I are on this Grand Ron multi-day father-son trip. And it's easy to just like manage a situation. And then like for my dad came to me and he's like, I am really scared if something happens to your mom, if your mom's not going to be there. And for him to be really vulnerable, that was like a huge memory
To
point
his son, yeah.
to him, like
yeah.
seeing my dad scared and sad, and but having the space to be able to process that. Other things calming down of like, this is, it doesn't, like, alcohol kind of numbs things, for kind of setting or things like that, but I think it just gives you a new platform to start processing through a lot of stuff in our lives. And so that's one memory that really sticks out of like, oh, as my very first year or second year in Peak 7, and then having to work through this with my dad,
Yeah.
and being on that, in middle of nowhere, miles of nothing, and no cell phone reception or anything, and just working through that with my dad, of fear of, and losing my mom or those kind of things. So yeah.
For sure. I mean, I've had, I have experiences like with the big things when you're out in nature, like you learn how to like process them maybe in a more less stressful way or in a more peaceful way, like seems like you kind of find a more acceptance of what's happening and going on, but it still has to be processed, but at least for that time, out there, you can process it more peacefully and less stressed. That's my
Yeah,
experience.
it's like,
So
what is a real need? Food, water, shelter.
Right.
Those kind of things, community, and like, what do we really need? I remember, going back from, you'll be out in the backcountry for quite a while, and you'll turn on a faucet and just like, wow, like on demand water, and how much you have to work for clean water in outdoor places. Or how essential water is. It's just amazing. I love, there's so many rich life lessons. Even This last a few years ago, just young kids, crazy time. I said, I'm not going to go elk hunting this year. Way too much going on. My buddy calls me, like, hey, we should go elk hunting. And I was like, oh, we're not going to get any elk. But I thought, let's get away. And so we were able to just get away. I knew like there's no way in the short amount of time, no scouting, huge area of land, tiny little herd, but just getting out archery hunting and walking and talking about our lives, our marriages, our relationship with God. And just like, whoa, these are the things that really matter of all the other stuff. It's just amazing to reset, even though I knew like there's no way. The kids would be like, Dad, where's the elk? And my wife's, like, oh, why are you guys doing this?
Yeah.
But I think the richer things of are why.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've heard that from other hunters too. It's like, it's not always about getting the kill. It's about, just being out there and, of course you have kind of a mission to, find your hunt, but it's about that experience of being out there in the woods like that with another partner, friend for that long of a time, Yeah. I've never been hunting. Elk hunting sounds awesome from what I've heard. And if I were going to do it, I'd have to do it with a bow. I think that's the only way I would hunt is, archery. I just feel like that's kind of levels the playing field a bit and just feels more primal, even though these bows these days are crazy, but
elk do a good job leveling that playing field.
Yeah, they're smart.
They are in some really tough country, but yeah.
I've seen them when I've been out in the back country, but never with the intent of hunting them, of course. It's amazing how quickly they disappear.
They know. They're smart. They know when, I'll see them all the time, or not all the time. I'll see them out there when I'm just not hunting. Yeah. But when an animal's being hunted, they know. But yeah.
Yeah. Only time I like one that actually stands out specifically, I was in the Blue Mountains, like in Oregon. We came up over this hill. We were way up in the mountains, and we came up over this like what looks like a hill, but we're on top of a mountain, but this like meadow, and all you could see were like the elk eyes like right over the crest of that hill meadow, and they were just like watching us, and then they just like backed up, and then I mean this meadow was huge, and then the wood, like I don't know where they went, but they were gone. Like it was so cool to just see probably like 5-6 of them just like vanish. It's pretty amazing. Yeah. So I wanted to talk about you said you were born with a limp. So what was like the medical condition of that?
Yeah. So actually I wasn't necessarily born with a limp. I was born with a lot of birth defects in my right leg.
Okay.
And so one of the symptoms was my right leg was shorter than my left in a significant way. If I didn't do anything, I'd have like a ridiculous over 3-inch lift on my shoe, and just would be really bad on my back. So they had to. It was kind of a newer procedure at Shriner, or a newer procedure, but they basically would go in, break my femur with like a hammer and chisel, and then put pins and an external cage on, and I'd have a little wrench, and I'd lengthen my leg a little bit each day, and they also stopped the growth of my other leg. But when they did that and lengthening the lengthening procedure, the bone is broken, but everything else has to stretch, skin, tendons, those kind of things. And so my knee actually got pulled out of joint and just zapped all the cartilage in my knee. And so right now, after all those surgeries, I have like a bow in my leg, and then also a very limited range of motion in my knee. And the doctor went in to release the scar tissue, and he said, if I release this scar tissue, it's going to be bone on bone, and you're going to be like destroying your knee and in so much pain. I'm going to have to keep the scar tissue there as a replacement for the cartilage. And so I've had to like modify and adapt. And even in the outdoors, I think it's continuing, just kind of working through those things, my feelings of inadequacy, of someone else could do this more. I think limitations of to the extent of which I can do something. So I enjoy climbing, but it's it takes me a lot longer to climb because I don't have range of motion in my right leg, especially like climbing gyms of like where they're designed only one way. Rock I can do a little bit more. Same with like backpacking, mountaineering. I can do it, but I've decided to just kind of back off a little bit. Snowboarding, just I'll go for it and try it. I've been backing off as I get older, just realizing like I destroy my good knee, or even mess up my bad knee worse. It's going to be really life altering more. So just accepting that of like, okay, I'm not going to snowboard as much. I'm going to go cross country skiing, or I'm not going to be able to climb. Water sports are really good, and I can do rafting, a little bit of kayaking, those kind of things. But I think it is that, but it also creates a place of vulnerability. Working with kids in the outdoors, and for them, they're vulnerable. They say like, I can't do this. Like that'll be a huge thing. Like I'm done. I can't keep going.
Yeah.
And for me to come alongside in my limitations and say, no, like we can do this. It's really hard, but we can continue, and seeing that. And then just being able to be vulnerable during life stories too, and be able to talk about things that maybe they can share.
Yeah. It opens up that conversation maybe, right? A little bit easier. So, I mean, being that, you're the leader of the organization, you have this impairment, but it actually probably in certain ways inspires a lot of the kids that are like going through it, and they see you leading the charge and whatnot, and maybe it helps them dig a little deeper potentially, right? Or
yeah, I think so. And the other thing too is the outdoor industry, not always, but can have a little bit of like a one-up kind of thing, or
for sure,
how good, like
it's always that way,
these kind of things. And so to create a space for kids who have never been in the outdoors, not all guides, but like for specifically Peak Seven's guides and Peak Seven's culture, it's not about like how hard you can climb. It's about for the kids and being with the kids. So if I have a guide who's like, oh, I want to like climb huge mountains and do crazy climbs, maybe like working at Peak 7 isn't the most, because we're going to be doing a lot of hiking through the hills. We're going to be doing like Mount Baker, and we're going to get to base camp, and half the kids is like, no, we're going to hang out at base camp. And for us, we're not like a push for the summit at all costs. It's about the experience along the way. And so I think it can create a safer place for them to like go into the woods for the first time, not know and not feel stupid kind of things of like, oh, you should know this or don't know this. And so I think having guides who aren't
that
like
is huge in the outdoor industry. Like even when you get like that superiority of like what people know versus what people don't know, even when you go through training, it can feel that way. Like, oh, like, but at some level, I think it's, you kind of have to toughen up and, like, I'm not speaking for the kids. I'm speaking for like anybody that's seeking training in the outdoor. Like you kind of have to let go of your ego and be vulnerable and know that you don't know what you don't know, and that's okay. And these guys that have been teaching it for so long, they have to repeat this over and over and over to people. So it might not always come out the best way. It's just like they've been doing it, and you need to get the message. And sometimes it has to be curt for you to understand the severity of what you're learning. Because, it's a lot of times it's life and death based upon these skills you learn in real outdoor situations. In any situation, like I took 2 courses this winter. I took my avalanche course, and I took my wilderness first aid. In the wilderness first aid course, I was just like, afterwards, I realized how much I don't know. Like now I know that I know so much of nothing about first aid than when I took the class. Like you think now that class has opened up to me how much more training I need to take to really even be effective, because the wilderness first aid is like, yeah, here you go. These are some things that you should know and do, but like to memorize that, to actually execute it in the field and all of that. Like that course is just really just to open your eyes to what you don't know.
Yep.
And then it's up to you if you want to keep seeking training after. And for me, if I'm like gonna seriously take, backcountry split boarding serious, like the wilderness first aid is not enough for me to feel comfortable with people in the backcountry and knowing what you have to do in serious situations.
Yeah. No, the wilderness first responder and,
Yeah.
and just getting out there too and having real life experiences. Like
Yeah.
even at a woofer where it's like 8 days of experience, all of a sudden a year later something happens in the wilderness. Like, whew, it's amazing. And it's just how it can disappear. And so just continuing to learn
Yeah.
and continue to have those experiences with people in the outdoors. Yeah.
But I want to double back on your birth. How would I properly say it? Birth defects? I mean,
Yeah.
is that okay? All right. So you had your first surgeries when you were 11. Is
Yeah.
that when they started?
Yeah. I
And
had
so-
braces and stuff when I was little too. I had like
Yeah.
a lift and stuff like that. But yeah.
So I imagine there was a lot of things that were difficult growing up the way that you did from other kids, whatever the situation might be, right?
Yeah.
So, and now when I meet you, and I met you a couple months ago or within this year, I believe, you seem like a very strong individual mentally. You hold yourself very well. You're leading an organization that does great work for people. But I imagine that you had to do a lot of work to gain this confidence and overcome some of these setbacks that some people might perceive as a setback. I'm curious about your mindset, how you dealt with these challenges growing up, how you potentially overcame them, or how you still have
Yeah.
to maybe revisit and work through these inadequacies, because we all have them. Yours is just showing in a physical way more visible, but all of us try to hide ours that don't have maybe the physical defects, but we all have the internal defects that we're dealing with. So what has been your process of dealing with this card you were dealt in life?
Yeah. I feel like the physical aspect of with my knee and with my leg was a little easier, like being a teenager and just like I can overcome the world, already, and so it's like I'm not gonna let it set me back, and I went for everything, and
So you
still
had a
tried
strong head as a young kid, like you didn't let it stop you from
I did
doing anything. That's great.
Yeah,
man.
I would
That's
be out
awesome.
on crutches, like it's sledding or something like that. I just put my crutches on my sled, get on the sled, head down the driveway, with my helmet on my runner sled.
Awesome.
Yeah. So I think the physical aspect in that time in my life, and then just seeing my dad and his blindness too, and kind of seeing that example of him continuing to push past. I think the harder part is more the relational, or just the softer stuff, I guess. Specifically, just providing. I think growing up, trying to fit in,
Right.
with just socially, of like, what do I have to contribute? And so like kids would get dropped off at the hospital by their parents to hang out with me, and they'd be naturally like super excited to go to the lake later on. Like, oh, we're going to the lake. We're in all these things that I, wasn't able to do. And so I think like left out is a real powerful phrase in my life right now, and just kind of processing like how that kind of people confidence and socially, like someone really cares and accepts me, and I don't have to provide that value of like, what does this person need, because I can't recreate on the same level. And
Yeah.
so I'm not going to be as fun as a kid that has like full working legs or something
Yeah.
like that. So yeah, I think that, and that still like, even affects me today. Just kind of processing through. I have that air, but I also have a lot of confidence stuff of like
Yeah.
with the executive, especially with the executive director position of like, hey, coming out of the pandemic, it was really tough financially for Peak 7. We had just really depended on, I mean, we work with organizations on what they can afford. And so we don't necessarily make we don't make a majority of our money through, registration fees. We make it through donations, and we do fundraisers, event-based fundraisers. And so the pandemic hit those event-based fundraisers and showed us some other weaknesses in our organization. And so it came to a point where we had to really reduce staff. And I was trying to balance the budget, working on it in September of 2020. And I was like, it doesn't balance. Like, one of the big positions has to go. We can't, continue at this. So I wrote myself out of the budget, and I was like, hey, I balanced the budget. I made it work. And the board said, no, like, we're not going to accept that. And so the executive director at the time, really awesome guy that I loved working with, and he wrote himself out of the budget. And so the board had to basically decide, like, what are they going to do? And so when they chose, like, hey, we're going to stick with someone who knows, we want to be continuing in the community, someone who's program oriented, more knowing the programs and be able to run the programs and being able to be there and serve the capacity that the community needs. I just felt really at first inadequate of like, no, someone else can do this better. Someone else could do this better. And just kind of working with mentors and things like that of like, no, you're the right person for this job. We believe in you. And like, no, you're just like believing them and saying like, no, you're just saying that to make me feel better. Mm-hmm. And so those kind of things really come from those experiences at that hospital of like, man, if I fail at this, or those kind of things, normal things that anyone would work through. But for me, with my story, my confidence. So that's just one thing. But the physical aspect, I say, came fairly naturally. Just being a high school student and just wanting to go for it, feeling like I conquer the world. And
I love that, man.
And growing up, figuring out how to adapt. This is normal for me. Like, I don't notice my limp. I don't know that I limp. And then someone else is like, dude, what happened to your leg? Did you break it skiing or something like that? And like, kind of like a little bit of I don't mind it, but it's just like, oh yeah, like I forgot, and so having to work through that. So I don't think it's a big part of my story. Yeah. It's a huge part of my story. Yeah. And kind of working with God through that of like, I would not be the person I was today if I wasn't reminded of my weakness. I would be considered, I'd be like, oh no, I am strong. I can do this. And so I think having that vulnerability helps me lead in that organization of not having to know it all. It's like, no, someone might be able to do this better. Someone might be better at this. And I'm going to have a team. I'm going to surround myself with a team that's really talented. And I'm going to support them. And I'm going to serve them with my position and with that title. So, yeah.
That's great, man. It seems like your mind never really went the victim route like a lot of people do. I do, you know what I mean, in life with a lot of things, if you try to fight feeling victim or life's not fair or whatever these things are. And, the best mentality to have to overcome that is that I'm not going to allow these things to stop me, whatever these fears are, and to move forward. And to not let what seems to be an impairment that would prevent me from experiencing these things in life, I'm going to go experience them regardless. Yeah. And that's beautiful, and I think that people that have physical impairments that do that, we love that so much. And I say we, like, I don't mean separation. That's not how I intend it, because we're all here together, but what I'm saying is like when somebody with impairments physically goes and does things that are like, that person is doing that, like it really shows others that like whatever you're facing, Whatever doubts you have within yourself, whatever fears they can be conquered.
Yeah.
If that person did that, I can do that. And I'm not even going through nearly what that person is going through, And so it's so cool for you to hear, like, I don't even think about it. Like, I just do what I do. And when somebody says it to me, I'm like, oh yeah, like the fact that you're not even thinking about it on a daily basis like that is just shows how you've been able to train your mind to move forward in life and not let things hold you back because of whatever, So I commend you for that, man. I mean, that kind of mentality it's needed and it's infectious. So you being a leader for your organization and like you said, not letting that even be in your peripherals, that you just go and do what you're supposed to do as a leader it's awesome, man.
No, thanks. And there's definitely and there still are like times of like I don't know how to describe it. But I think just acknowledging that too, of like there are times where I feel victim or sorry for myself, but I just don't rest in that. I acknowledge it.
Yeah.
It's like, man, I am feeling I do feel like the victim. I do feel like it's unfair. And I think for me at first, I was like, I can't say that. I can't say that. I can't say that. But those thoughts were there still, even though I didn't want to acknowledge that. And so for me to start acknowledging, like, I feel this way, but it's still not true.
Yeah.
And kind of separating like how I feel and then knowing the truth.
Yeah.
Through that and speaking myself truth.
That's I have a saying that I have to remind myself of a lot, and it's know your truths, remember the lies. And so whatever your truths are, we know them inherently. Our higher self is always speaking the truth to us, but our lower self, it wants to spit out lies constantly and try to trick you into things to keep you at a certain level, because the ancient mind doesn't want you to progress. It doesn't want you to push the limit. It wants to keep you safe, and it doesn't want to experience anything new. But then we have our higher mind, and that's the one that's trying to, call us to our higher callings and push us out of those uncomfortable levels. And they're constantly fighting, and so it's like, which wolf do you feed? And, you've learned to feed the good wolf, the one that has that strength to persevere, more than you feed the bad wolf, because that bad wolf, it's hungry. It's more hungry. It wants to eat always. And the good wolf is just like, well, feed me if you want, but I'm here, And so I really love talks about mindset and how you deal with hardships in life, because I'm trying to learn a lot for myself, and I like to learn how other people process it through the challenges they've experienced. So thank you for sharing,
And I think even in that of like not only overcoming but also accepting accepting those limitations as I get older, of like I've climbed Mount Baker a ton of times. Descent like just crushes, like it hurts. I'm in tears. And so I think looking and also accepting my limitations, so like this is a very real physical thing, and I won't be able to, or it'll take me so much time to get through these barriers for like rock climbing. I have to be out there so much to get through these barriers. And right now my priority is spending time with my kids, and being a dad, and not, messing up my leg so much that I can't like run or whatever I call running with my kids or something like that, because, I was out snowboarding. So I think the other part, like in this journey, like through high school, college, 20s, 30s, very much realizing like, yeah, I can do this. I can go for it. And now like, okay, this is a very real limitation, and my limitations don't necessarily define me. And I can just look at those priorities of like, I don't, so I backed off the mountaineering and those things too. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I think what you said is important with acceptance. It's not always about beating something out or overcoming. It's, the challenge, and sometimes the hardest thing to do is just to practice acceptance of, there's certain maybe things that I just have to realize and that's okay.
Yeah. No, I
And
remember
that's okay.
I remember my dad kind of going through that because his visual impairment was progressive.
Yeah.
And
So it
so
happened really quickly to him. Is that
no,
where
it happened slowly
okay.
over time. So like he couldn't see the blackboard at school, and then when I was kind of going through surgeries and stuff like that, he was having to learn how to use a white cane and accepting and he didn't want to accept that he was blind. And so I got to watch my dad kind of going through that of like how hard it made everyone who wants to help him and give him the tools that he's going to need versus like maybe being angry and accepting like I don't want to be blind. I'm angry and those things. So being able to see my dad kind of go through that and how it affected our family of like, no, here's, opportunities like a white cane. So you're not walking into buildings or, the walking whatever,
Right.
into situations that can be really dangerous. And so, yeah, I think there is a real limitation in kind of going through that own journey on myself of like, okay, I need to understand that so that how would that affect my family? If I was out and just totally destroyed my knee and I can't really fix it either. I was talking to a specialist maybe 2 years ago, and he's like, yeah, your leg is so deformed, you can't like even put in a mechanical leg. Like, what you got
Really,
is
you
what you
couldn't
got.
do a prosthetic essentially is what
Yeah, you couldn't put in a knee just the way it's formed and stuff like that. I couldn't do a fake knee. So it'd be like, it'd just be like he didn't know what would happen if the pain became so bad. Hey, if I continue, just really hard on my leg, the pain's going to get so bad. So just accepting that of like, okay, I need to listen to this and accept that. So yeah, it's a process of both of like going for it and, not letting it define me and pushing beyond that, but also like, no, this is a part of my story. I do have a limp and it can encourage those around. Like you talked about the kids on the trip who are really struggling, like saying they can't. And then other leaders like, hey, you see, up there, like he's walking with a limp. He's basically climbing this whole mountain with one leg. It's, one leg match, one leg forward, one leg match, one leg forward.
Yeah, and dude, that's ultra impressive to me, man. Like, you said like a descent on Baker and how much that can hurt. Like some of my descents have been like I can barely walk myself, man. Like I'm like falling down the mountain basically. Like my knees are giving out, like so for you to go through that same thing shows a lot of just resilience. I guess that's maybe a good word for it. Just being resilient, and just like I'm gonna see this through no matter the pain, because I know it's got to be very painful at times, and so it's cool, man. I'm enjoying digging into your mindset and how you've been able to be strong through your life.
Thanks.
Yeah. Guess we could transition to more about Peak 7 and what you guys are doing. But one of my questions is what are your beliefs of why we kind of talked about this, but what are your beliefs on how outdoor adventures help people unlock their greater potential?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's really about having perceived limits and perceived barriers. And it kind of goes into your other kind of thought of like favorite trips. I just love being able to have someone like, I can't do this. And not just a boot camp kind of thing. Like, oh no, you're going to do this, but it's a do with. Like we're in the outdoors. There isn't really quitting's. It's not like it's a challenge by choice where you can leave any time. It's like it's impossible for you to leave. Like once you're on this adventure, and we're going to support you in those ways. But for them to see like what could be, or that wonder after a trip, like I could be a guide, of just the confidence I think that builds. So I think one, overcoming perceived limits, and then just just to like expanding what could be. I think the imaginative nature of the outdoors, of being in an outdoor space, can get kind of those imaginative things going of more futuristic thinking. I think when kids are in the city, this is all there is. This is all they know, and they these 4 blocks or this neighborhood, and to take them and be with them on Mount Baker, and like being able to see out along the Sound and the islands, and like this world is a really big place, and it's so imaginative of like the God who made this has a plan and has a story for your life, and you can live into that and more. So I think it really asks like there is more out there. So I think there's a lot of different ones, but those are the 2 that come to mind the first thing when I think about helping kids unlock their greater potential.
Yeah, there's, like you said, once you're out there, you're kind of out there. You can't just get right back in your car when you've been hiking for days or whatever it is, or wherever you're at.
Yeah.
But like for me, there's been times where I'm out somewhere and I'm like there's no getting away from this. Like you're in this, and there's times where you just want to maybe get back to the comforts or whatever it is, but you just keep pushing yourself. And I think that's where like your talk of perceived limits happens, is because like you're forced into a situation where you have to keep going. Even when you're headed back, like there's times where you're like, I don't know how if I got enough to get back. And the only option though is to get back. So you got to just keep going forward, and keep pushing towards your destination. So that's one thing in outdoors that's helped me. It's like learning how to push myself when I want to quit. Me and my friends, my brother and another friend of mine, we have a joke, like right when we start on the trail, we say, call the helicopter, call the heli, man, we're not going to make it, and another thing we'll do to tease people, like as soon as we start on the trailhead, is like if somebody's coming out, we're like, how much further do we got? Like, just asking funny questions like that, because it's how it goes. Like if you're starting a hike and a crazy ascent is in it right away, you're like, oh man, like gotta keep going. Like, so it's good to get out there in those ways to push yourself, and like how it translates to like, hopefully it translates to you in life of dealing with hard things you got to overcome, and just keep pushing and going forward.
It does, and that's why we work with a lot of organizations. I remember one of the one of the people that really stands out. His name was Andrew. He's in Seattle, and I think the organization we were working with was 2 different organizations. One was like Catholic Community Services, and so they had some young people signed up for the trip, and I was meeting them. And I could see like this one kid was like super excited, and I could tell for certain things of like, oh, this person's really going to struggle. Even his mindset, like just super excited, and then I can see that crashing a little bit. And he was the most excited of all the kids, and got out we did the coastal trail. It's like 17 miles, and the tides go in and out and kind of create choke points that you have to get past. Otherwise, you're going to be in the ocean. And so it's like day 2, and we get we get out. The first day is like boardwalk to the beach, and he's just having a great time. Then you start hitting that deep sand. And then after the deep sand, it's like slippery rocks. And he just continues to face the next thing, and he's like, okay, I'm done. Like, I quit. I can't do this. And the tide had choked point, hit the yellow banks, and I was like, no, we can't go. And he's like, no, I'm done. I was like, no, like we literally, like, we can't go. See how the water is, or the cliff, we were on a cliffside, and I see how this is all wet right here. It's the ocean will be here in a few hours. And he's like, well, just leave me. And I was like, no, we're not going to leave you. We're going to stay together.
Yeah.
And when he realized that like quitting, and then he's like, I'll just take the bus. I'll just take the bus. And I said, the closest road is through that rainforest, and there's no bus line on that. And he threw down his pack and just this like almost primordial screaming at the sky of like he couldn't quit. And so this whole journey, we were out an extra day. I remember distinctly like taking a Snickers bar with a pocket knife and dividing it into 6 different spots and stuff like that. And the kids all came around and carrying his gear and encouraging him like one more step. And then we get to like a rope ladder to the top of this ridge. And he's like, I'm afraid of heights, and just hugging the top. And I was just done. I was like, why are we taking kids on these things? This is crazy. And I would just be looking around that next bend. We'd come along the ocean, and I'd look around the next bend. I was like, oh, please, just like sand again. And it's just as far as you can see, slippery rocks. And and so at the end of that, like it was just a battle. Every step was a victory. At the end of that, he got back to the car, and I was just like, that was the most mentally exhausting trip I've ever done. Just every step of victory for 17 miles, a whole extra day. And a year later, I get a text message or a Facebook message, and he's like, "Hey, Austin, remember that time that I wanted to quit, but you wouldn't let me?" And I was like, "Yeah, I do." He's like, "Thank you so much. I graduated high school today." And afterwards, I had, even right after the trip, when the administration realized that Andrew had gone on the trip, like, oh, he should not have gone on that trip. Like when Andrew hits his wall, he like freaks out until he gets to go home. Like he gets his wall and he knows how to quit. And I think he can, people can have those labels, and it takes a while to reset of like, that's who Andrew is. Andrew, when things get hard, Andrew quits. And as you say that about yourself, as others say that, that's your lived experience.
Yeah.
Things got hard and you quit. And for his first time in Andrew's life, he couldn't quit. And he was able to make that connection of graduating high school, being able to like overcome of like, this is the perceived limit. I'm not a quitter. Like I can do this. And he had people that cared about him around him. And so organizations, their leadership, like, hey, remember that time you're on Mount Baker and you looked at that mountain, like there's no way. And one step at a time, what is the next step right here look like for you? Like, don't look at the whole mountain, just look at that next step. So I think helping them realize their greater potential of like those things they thought they would never be able to do, like whitewater, be working with a community in inner city Seattle, and we'll be doing a safety talk. Like, okay, if you fall out of the boat, and like, what do you mean if we fall out of the boat? And just the idea and the terror and the fear of, and the out of controlness of whitewater, and for them to like embrace that and smile and have the waves crash over the boats, like whatever those perceived limits are of like, no, I don't do water. I don't know how to swim. I didn't grow up with that kind of stuff. Yeah. And to be able to smiling through that. So I think that's a huge part of that greater potential.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, getting out there, doing these kind of adventures, it forces you to face these fears. I mean, that's really what's happening at the base, and like in societal life, you can kind of avoid fears to some extent, depending on where you're from. There's all sorts of different variables there, but mostly we can find our comfort zones, whether it's on our tablet or our TV or these different things that are available to us to kind of disengage us from really facing these internal fears or inadequacies that we have. You can kind of neglect them. But when you put yourself out there, it's kind of just a form of like, I'm putting myself out here to face my fears. And I think, like you said, with the guys that free solo and do these extreme forms of outdoor activities, it's really about them trying to work through in their mind the fears that they have. Like they have fears. They're not fearless people, but they're not scared to face them. And they use outdoor physical activities to do so, and like I'm listening to the book Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins right now. That dude's on a whole other level where he takes it. But I mean, basically the reason he's so extreme is all because of his fears and inadequacies of his childhood traumas and growing up, and him just trying to prove that he's enough, and he's taken it to extreme measures, whether it's his ultra marathons and his experiences, Navy SEALs and Delta Force and all the crazy stuff that guy's accomplished. But it's about him putting himself in a situation where he has to face his fears. And I don't know if I'm always doing that when I go to outdoors, because sometimes I'm taking a hike, it's just about me maybe processing things. But then there's the times where, especially like for me, I'm an avid snowboarder, been doing it since I was 6. I love it. I'm just now feeling strong enough in my skill sets to start going into the backcountry, and my maturity too. I just never had a guide or a mentor before to take me into the backcountry. It's always something I wanted to do, but I always respected it and knew that I've always been a wild card. I just now feel like, as a man, I'm 34, that I've gained the maturity to take myself into the backcountry. Also, I go with people now that I've met that have experience, of course, but that I'm wise enough to face these fears and respect these fears of what I have to deal with going into the backcountry in winter conditions, which is very dangerous.
Yeah.
It's super dangerous, but it's also like makes you feel alive, and there's nothing like hiking up a mountain in the snow and being able to snowboard down it. And I finally got to experience that this winter, and that was amazing. But I was scared a lot of the time, and so I think for me, putting myself in that uncomfortable situation, though it's something that I yearn for, it's helped me realize, like you said, greater potential. Like, well, all right, I can learn these things. I can put myself in these situations and get out of it so far, and you just kind of want to see what else you can accomplish. So I don't know. I've had a lot of great experiences. One, too, was like me and my brother and my dad went on a rafting trip through Hell's Canyon last summer. And that was, my dad's he's early 80s. So he's grandpa age, but he initially wanted to do like a 7-day trip. He's never done a trip in his life that long. So I was like, no, Dad, so, like, I appreciate you want to get out there. 7 days is a long time on a river, long time. You get cold easy, these different things. We did the 3-day, and it was challenging for him, but he did it, and you think about times out there, like if he got hurt or one of us got hurt, like it's going to be a while before someone's able to get to you, and so you really also learn how to make, hopefully if you have this awareness when you're out there, you have to learn how to make wise decisions, and not be so reckless in your decision making. And I feel like that translates back into society as well. Like you really have a deeper thought pattern of how to make decisions and the repercussions that they could have. Like even when I do simple things, sometimes they seem simple, but like making a simple decision like to maybe skip a step, which in the backcountry could cost you your life. Like the other day I was putting together a mailbox out at my family property, and I anchored the mailbox to the top of the post, but then it was still a little like not as sturdy as I wanted it to be. So there was area where I could put in 2 side screws. I thought that might help with the sturdiness. And I decided I was like, I should do a pilot hole so I don't crack the wood, but it'll probably be okay. So I didn't do the pilot holes. One side was fine. The other side cracked. And I was like, see, I skipped that step. That step was important. And I should have made the right decision and went and done the actual step to get the safest, well, not the safest, but the best result. And all I could think about is like, what if you made that kind of decision in the backcountry and that costed somebody's rope to fall or whatever the case may be, you know? And so I start thinking that way now that I have more of that experience.
No, it's definitely something that comes up with with kids. I think a lot sometimes can be like they talk about maybe helicopter parents or snowplow parents of paving the way, over paving the way for the kids, and for when they realize like, hey, the actions I take, they do have consequences of like, hey, this is how you gonna take care of your pack. And so it's just pouring down rain, and the kid's like, I'm cold. I want to be in that tent. And so they leave their pack in a puddle with the brain open and just raining in there. And they're like, hey, all my clothes are wet. Can I have some more? And I'm like, no, that's the clothes. Like, could I have some dry socks? And like, no, the clothes we have, you can wear them and they'll warm, you got to warm them up. And so just seeing, not rescued from your consequences as much, or enabled of like, oh, wow, no, that had an effect on the whole, my decision, or lack of decision made a whole effect on the whole group. And so being able to talk with students even about that, they'll be playing around we'll be on a backcountry campsite and they'll be playing around with, doing some jump or playing around with the fire or something like that. And like, hey, I'm going to ask you guys to stop. I know you can probably do it, but if you can't do that standing backflip or something like that and you get injured out here, it's going to affect so much. Normally you'd go out, your parents' place or whatever and just throw you in the minivan, take you to the hospital. But out here, like a thing like a broken leg, is a whole, like, it's a lot. And so I think, just being able to have a place where they are taking responsibility, for their actions. Like, I don't want to drink any water. Like, and then they're stumbling down the mountain and stuff like that. So no, I think it does help them realize like, no, there is those actions I'm taking not only affect myself, but affect others. Even we talk about paddling boats, people in recovery. I love taking people in recovery, whitewater rafting. There's just so many connections. And we don't just, as Peak 7, we're not just like, hey, that was a fun experience. See you later. But we're going to talk about it. Like, hey, let's talk about how the river is similar to our life journey. Like, what if one person in this boat wasn't paddling or was paddling backwards and wasn't going the same direction as everybody else? It would affect that whole boat, that one person's actions. And so like, who are the people that you have with you in your life? They're people who are there for you. Even when crazy stuff's happening, people are falling out, you want someone there for you, kind of pulling you back in. Or, you want someone who's going the same direction and not fighting you. And so like having that boat of like everybody paddling in unison, like one person out of sync will throw the angle of that boat off, and maybe at a really critical time was coming into a big wave. So I love being able to draw those life or the outdoor experiences to life and being able to make those connections.
Yeah, I love it too. So do you have like a Peak 7 adventure experience that stands out the most to you? I'm sure you have so many. Is there one that really felt uniquely special based upon maybe changing a kid's life? I mean, you shared one.
Yeah, that one is probably one of my favorites.
One of your favorites?
I think like because he was at his like physical limit and I was at my emotional limit of like, this is not worth it. Like, this is so emotionally draining. And then seeing like for him to see the results of his effort and then for me to see the results of my effort. That was one of my more favorite ones. I had, one on Mount Baker, very similar kid, just was told that they would quit. Like, I knew they would quit. And we actually brought everybody stays together, but knowing when that young person hits their wall of like, okay, we're going to bring an extra tent and sleeping bag. And he knew that was in there. Like, there was an out for him. And we got to the one place that I could put a bivvy and a sleeping bag. And he saw that, and we were just able to really process through that and continue up that mountain, just one step. And he got to the summit of Mount Baker. And his life, like you said, it doesn't change their lives forever, but it has a nudge. It has a trajectory impact. And so, just like his working through with his dad or something like that. Remember that time on Mount Baker? Like he'll never be in the outdoors again in that situation going up that, but he'll remember that
Yeah, I remember
for
it
his whole life. So that was probably
yeah.
probably one of the ones like when we first started out. Like we've kind of grown up a lot. But when we first started out, we just do whatever. We have lots of fun. So risk management maybe was a little different. Um, and
Yeah.
so we had
Baker's a big mountain.
it is. We were doing, I forget what, we weren't doing Baker at that time,
Yeah.
but we were doing a different mountain and we were doing a traverse. And we were teaching the kids how to use the ice axe and self belay and lean on to that and lean into the mountain and drive the ice axe in. And one of the students just was absolutely not doing it correctly and couldn't figure out, he's leaning away and just fearing that mountain. And so I had it was probably one of the craziest trips. There's so many different stories on it, but it was a backpacking trip up in the Cascades, early season. So we were doing a traverse in snow, melted out, like run out was melted out, just super exposed. Didn't have a rope to set a fixed line. Don't know if I could have gotten a fixed line if I had enough snow to work with, but yeah, we were going across that. And so I had one of the guides like, hey, you're going to have to stand below this person and like tackle them into the snow if they go, because I don't know what else we're going to do.
Yeah.
And so we're going through, and sure enough, that kid peels off and starts heading the worst thing, like face first down the mountain.
Oh my
and the
goodness.
guide takes one bound, grabs him by the cuff of the pants,
Oof.
and brings him back up. So,
Wow.
yeah, but just those times, like, ooh, that was close. And I learned from that of like, okay, we need to have more training in place and those things. But that was one of my, I don't know why it was one of my favorites, but yeah, I'm trying to think. I used the Andrew one as probably my favorite story. So if I think of another one, I'll let you know.
Yeah. No, that one's great. To know you helped somebody not quit and graduate high school. It's important to it's I don't know. It's to be out there and know you can't quit. Like there is no option. You can't quit. No, it's man. Let's see. All right, yeah, I wanted to talk too about could you tell me about Peak Seven's new Police Adventure League and its impact so far?
Yeah, no, I'd love to. Yeah, so a few years ago, there was a police officer who gave me a call. His name was Pat, and he was in juvenile corrections in Airway Heights, and he's like, "Hey, I see these kids coming in and out all the time. I had a kind of tougher story growing up, and I want these kids to know that they're this path that they're on is not a given. It's not like, oh, this is just who you're going to be. I want them to see that there's another way, and I want to be able to take them climbing. I want to be able to do these adventures." And as much as I love saying yes, I was like, hey, with kids in corrections and stuff like that, trying to figure that out, it's really, really tough. Like I don't have the training for my staff. And for you, it put a lot of risk and stuff like that in training. We just don't have, the resources or even the liability structure to pull something off like this.
Right.
And so a few years later, he gave me a call. It's like, hey, I'm a school resource officer, and I'd love to be able to take kids from the school. And so I was like, okay, let's go. And so it was really his dream of being able to connect with these kids. He loved the outdoors, loved rock climbing, wanted to be able to kind of talk and share story. And so he worked with the school counselor in Airway Heights and said what kids would be good to be able to take on these trips. And so some kids with some really challenging backstories, times where he'd like when Pat was a police officer just in the city, having to arrest their parents or show up at their parents' house several times. Some of the kids were expelled from school for threatening different things, gang activity. And I was like, there's no way like these kids are going to want to spend like a whole summer or half a summer with a police officer. I was like, he's not going to be able to convince them. And he was able to. And the kids saw that, were able to kind of change their perspective of police, of seeing someone there just serving, being there, of like serving these kids, sharing these experiences. The cool thing about the outdoors is everyone's in it together. You're not like doing something you're with. The outdoors is the do too. And so you're cold, you're miserable, you want to be home at the same time. And you're with these kids like, hey, what can I take out of your pack? What do you need to support you on this next part? Do we need to rest for a little bit? And then being able to share story, and is really powerful. And so these 8 or 9 kids, gang activity, being able to, one of the conversations they had with one of our guides is like being able to just emotionally process. It's like he said to our guide, it's like, I wish I had more freedom, or guys had more freedom to just express emotion. This it kind of sucks how we can't. And like being in outdoors just was able to process that with our guide. And he was like a school counselor. And so just a safe person to be able to talk with and open up with. And then also not only like the students' police perception of police officers changing, but also police perception too of like
really helping.
I think the idea of just emotional connection, I think you can, it's safer and smarter sometimes to just turn off that emotional part of sharing your story. It's like, it was time to share life stories. And it's like, hey, we're going to be sharing life stories overnight it's a multi-day on the Deschutes. And we're going to be, actually it was a overnight where we did Smith Rock and then rock and rafting on the Deschutes. And so just in the middle of the desert, we're going to be sharing life stories. And he's like, yeah, I got that. And I was like, but I want you to not just share about, what happened with your mom or your family. I want you to share about how you felt. Like, these kids need to be able to express that. He's like, I don't know. Like, that's a whole nother thing. And so be able to work through that and be able to share. This is like more vulnerability.
This was the police officer on the journey.
Yeah.
Was he the only one on the journey?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So the kids, and it was just really amazing. It was a lot of parents like, whoa, this was life-changing. And the kids now, they want to come back.
Yeah.
And like take the next group of kids. And so they're going to come back and be like assisting in climbing and belaying and things like that as this a new police officer is going to take another group of kids from the school. So it's just
awesome.
kind of breaking down those barriers. I think the outdoors, when you have, an authority position and you have the uniform, the gun or the badge, everything like that. And, you're dressed in like whatever gang colors or things like that. And everybody has their safety protection. All of that comes off and you're putting on wetsuits and helmets and you look ridiculous and you're rafting together. It really removes
breaks down those barriers.
Those social barriers that we create of just two people hiking in the woods, the vulnerability of like in paddle rafts or belaying of like that kid lets go of that rope. For that officer. And so just that mutual trust and being able to be together, it's going to change the perspective of that relationship at the school and working with police officers. Like, man, he really does care. And the cool thing, I remember just seeing the difference of Pat. We were at a launch on the Spokane River and a guy was passed out, probably coming off something under a picnic table there. And we were just kind of like, just around and had our gear and equipment and he was just gone. And I was like, it's easy just to ignore. It's like, I'm just going to ignore the situation and just work around. And he stepped in and I thought, oh, he's going to, get in trouble or something like that. He's like, hey, you need anything? gave him some Gatorade that we had and set
Mm.
it down there and stuff like that. Just seeing like, man, he really cares.
Mm.
So I think it's the right person too. Of like,
Yeah.
I was working with the grant writer to write a grant for the program, and she's like, I see this program succeeding because of Pat, and like he really cares for the kids and wants to connect other programs that she's written grants for, similar programs where all the kids are over here doing their thing, playing, and then all the officers are just hanging out, sitting on coolers, smoking and joking. But like Pat to like really be there with the kids every day, like they knew that he cared. And so it's just really cool, really powerful.
He sounds like a cool person to
He
talk
is.
to.
Yeah, you should definitely
I
have
have
him on.
to, see if you could connect me with him and see if he'd be interested. That'd be cool. Well, I have a rough past myself with the law, and I now have a good friend who is an ex-police officer. He retired recently, but he was the first officer I ever knew personally. Well, the way I came up, I didn't like police for sure, and they locked me up quite a bit, or got me in trouble quite a bit. So I didn't have when I was a young male adult, a understanding for them and their job, and as I've grown up and I've removed myself from a lot of the ways that I used to live, I now have a lot more understanding and respect for police officers, and especially ones that are actually serving the community, which I think is the primary role of what a police officer should be, is somebody that serves the community and protects the community, and that means being there for them. And so for this guy Pat to really care about where these kids' lives are going, instead of just being like, I'll lock you up, kid, if you break the law, Instead, he's like, no, I don't want you guys to end up here. You don't have to end up here. There's other options. He's actually seeking out ways to show them that, and doing it through the outdoors, because, Spokane kind of is a little boring place to live sometimes unless you get into the outdoors. There's a whole, like, that's my opinion. I think that the city's gotten a lot better over the years, like the things that we do offer, but overall, there's not a whole lot going on unless you access the outdoors, and then it becomes a whole nother world. And yet there's kids here who have never had that opportunity because it's never been presented or offered to them to even go to Mount Spokane, which is an amazing place. Mount Spokane is very special. If you get a hike there or, snowboard there, it's special. But in the summer, you can easily get there and hike around Mount Spokane. It has a very special feeling, great views. But, there's a high majority, I'm sure, of people who have never experienced it, yet alone kids.
My favorite part is taking people who would not be able to have access. It's just, you think about, like you talked about, backcountry or split boarding, and you had someone who knows more and brings. It's not like you could just buy a split board and like, okay, it's just a resources thing. It's also someone inviting you along, and so
the invitation is huge.
And the knowledge, like for you, like split boarding is that like next level, but for someone else, maybe theirs is snowshoeing. Like it's super simple. Like going to the trip, sometimes as easy as guides to like, oh, go snowshoeing on Mount Spokane.
Yeah.
But it's super inaccessible and fearful. Like what something happens? How do you wear the snowshoes? And I had some really powerful snowshoeing trips this winter. And just seeing like, whoa, I never knew Mount Spokane was this beautiful. Kids from Rogers High School, a teacher, she just wanted to take her students out. She's like, my kids never get to do anything like this. I'd love to take them. And she didn't have a budget. Like, let's just go. Let's take your students. Let's go. Picked them up at Rogers High School, and they loved it. Like seeing that thing of like, I want to continue doing this again. I love seeing that, or like, wow, this is so beautiful. I never knew Spokane had something this beautiful. Or like, my parents never do this. My dad just sits on a couch all day
Yeah.
and he can't do these things or doesn't do these things with me. This is amazing. So I just love like that glimpse of hope, of inspired, like I want to continue. Like this is something like he'll be like, I want to be a guide. And so it's not the goal for all of our stuff. Like some kids, like that trip up Mount Baker will probably be one of their last wilderness experiences. But other kids, like, this is what I want. And so introducing the numbers for the next generation getting into outdoor places are really, really bad. And just seeing the need for this next generation to be outside. Young people love being plugged into their phones and things like that. And so it's just, there's a huge need.
So you're saying for the next guiding generation, it's the numbers are way down.
Just
for
outdoor
that?
experiences.
Experience in general.
Like just being like number of visitors to outdoor places.
It's dwindling.
It's dwindling. It's
Wow.
Yeah. It's just, and so like be able to provide, like, okay, you need someone who knows more than you. And even though like snowshoeing, a lot of us would just, I got it.
Oh, you think it's safe,
but but for them, like that's huge.
Yeah.
Maybe a refugee community has never seen snow before, and then you have transportation, getting up and driving in the snow. So for them, they just see barrier after barrier of like, and so for us to come alongside and say, like, we're going to remove those barriers, transportation, the labels of you're a quitter or you can't do that, or these communities, and having like someone like a teacher or a police officer that they trust, inviting them and going with them into these outdoor places. We took a women's recovery group that struggles with homelessness and women who are experiencing homelessness and addiction, and we're driving up Mount Spokane, and they're like, just like, I want this for my kids. I want my kids to be able to experience this. And for we kind of set a goal of like, okay, there's the first stop, which is the first shelter, which is fairly easy, or a challenge to get to. But then there's a second shelter, and just seeing like, no, we want to get to that second shelter, and then also seeing that desire of like, I want this for my kids. My kids need to have this and experience this, and it's cool seeing not just the one-time users, but the people who are coming back and like, this is a reality.
Yeah.
This can be a reality for me is doing more outdoor stuff.
I think you touched on a good point. The invite, the invitation, the offering of making it all possible to do such a thing to somebody that's never been in or around that world, and to be able to invite and offer it to them in a way where they see, okay, well, I'm going to put my trust into these people. They know what they're doing. My organization leader or mentor trusts them. I trust that person. So I'm going to go ahead, and even though I'm leery about all this, I'm going to go ahead and try to experience it because the opportunity has now been presented. And how would you ever, if you did not have parents doing these kinds of things, how would you ever think in your mind to decide to go do such a thing? Mm-hmm. You wouldn't. The only way is honestly through organizations such as yourself, for these individuals, these kids that just don't have that opportunity. It's just not there until somebody in an organization like yourself comes along. And once you get them out there, then you open their eyes, to what's possible, or what's possible for their own children, like you're saying for the women's organization you were working with.
And I think the other thing too, in that invite, a lot of times has intention or like traces of ownership, and which we don't have. And so I think just being like mindful of like inviting you to join us. And I remember like we go to the Olympic National Park and take kids from the inner city to the Olympics, and the rangers talk to them and like, this is a national park. This is your park. And it's these 3 kids, it's their park just as much as it's my park. Like, this is like a shared public space. And so the idea of like, oh, this is our, inviting you into our space. No, inviting you along into our place. Like this is, and so I think it's really cool hearing that of like, this is your place, and not just, hey, we'll get up there and take maybe a refugee group who grew up in like a refugee camp, and maybe the kids aren't practicing the best leave no trace. It's really challenging. And so like someone will yell at them of like, hey, get off the, very unwelcome, like, hey, you guys don't need to be doing that. Don't run on the heather like that. And it's something that we're working on, but just that of like, no, don't damage the space. But versus like going back to base camp and talking about the experience afterwards, like this is your place. And the next year, the same kid came back up who was trying to hide trash under rocks, and they were actually cleaning up and picking up someone else's garbage on the next backpacking trip. So it's just really cool having that ownership and not just like someone else's space. So
yeah, the ownership, and I don't know what it is, like when you get invited out by somebody to do something cool. I don't know. It's just like a form of acceptance, too, in a way, right? Like for these kids, they might not initially know it, but I'm sure once they go on a journey like this, the feeling afterward is like, well, these people actually cared enough about me to take me somewhere like that and experience something like that. That was cool. Because maybe they've never even had anybody do anything even close to that for them in their life, and to show them this kind of awesome experience. I have a friend, Joseph Northcutt. He was on the podcast early on. He owns Bricks Conditioning Lab, but he and me have been on a hike or two. He's a black male from LA, and he grew up in like a notorious neighborhood, and he was able to go on a trip like what you offer with the organization. They took him camping for a few days, and it changed his whole life. He like had never experienced the silence of nature before, or silence at all. Like he just in a neighborhood where it's active, gang violence, gunshots, whatever is always going on. And he just remembered like laying there one time. I think he was laying under the stars or something. He's just like, I can't believe this like exists. Like this actually exists. Like he never been outside of what he was born into, really. And he went on to, join the military. He's had a successful career, but he's still active in the outdoors. And but that one experience that he went with that organization, and he actually, I think, participated and maybe volunteered for that organization for a while he was still growing up in the LA area. But that one trip changed his whole life, and now he loves the outdoors and has continued on doing it throughout his whole life. So, that's just like proof in the pudding of like an organization like what you do has a lasting lifetime effect on individuals. And, yeah.
No, I see that. Sometimes it's hard to see right away because they'll go and like never be back again. And a lot of times the next year, like you're like the kid, like I would never expect like you're going to have to wear a pack again. Like, I know. Yeah. Are we going to see like the tide pools? And I want to show and showing the next kids the next year on that spring break, coastal trip.
Yeah.
Those kind of things, like, or I'll meet someone, working at Home Depot or something like that, and they'll see the Peak 7 shirt, like, Austin, remember we went on that trip, and like that trip, that experience, really had an impact and really changed that. So it's really
priceless, cool. Man. It's priceless what you guys offer. What else do you offer at Peak 7? I think I remember hearing or you telling me you guys offer training to become guides as well.
Yeah. After the pandemic, I've had to kind of dial back a little bit. We did have guide training So for our volunteers, we do.
Right.
But just capacity wise, we've been looking at that. But right now, I want to focus on what we do really well, and that's partner with organizations
Yeah.
and make an impact in the lives of youth. So yeah, we have done a little bit. We have trainings, like our backpacking raft guide school. We now partner with an organization for wilderness first responder. And stuff like that. So, but it's not the main thing that we do. We do have
Right.
opportunities, but I've kind of scaled them back just because it can distract from our main mission of
Yeah.
getting students outside. So if there's a volunteer who's
But
like,
a volunteer,
yeah,
like if you volunteer and you can get them into position to
yeah,
guide, and
no,
that's
it's like
great.
I want to provide these opportunities. Or people in
Yeah.
retirement, like Gen X, as they're retiring, they want to retire differently, and so they love the outdoors. They want to be active, and so I'm getting a lot of people kind of getting towards retirement. Like, what I want to volunteer. I want to take kids into the outdoors, and just have those shared experiences, and providing those. So yeah, we have a lot of volunteers. Rock climbing, whitewater raft was a raft guide school. Backpacking is a little more difficult because someone who's a volunteer usually just doesn't have the capacity. So if we have a week-long training and then a week-long backpacking trip, that's 2 weeks is a lot to commit. But for our day trips, we do have a few volunteers for backpacking, but most of it is day trips or short overnight trips with whitewater rafting. So
Yeah.
No, one of our volunteers actually came through the Teen Challenge program, and he's every year, it's probably 2011, 2012, went through the program, went on a rafting trip, graduated the program, gave us a call. I was like, I want to be a guide. I want to be a Peak 7 guide. And so every spring, every weekend, he's there wanting, because of the impact that it had in his life, and wanting other people to be able to have that experience. And so, yeah, just every spring, every weekend, he's there taking kids, showing them the river and outdoors, and it's just really cool.
It's great. Is there anything else you'd like to share about Peak 7 and how people can help and such?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, volunteering is huge. If you work with another, like connecting, I love how your podcast can do that. Just having people and connecting people of like, hey, there's a business owner that maybe wants to give back into the community and wants to invest. We've had several businesses in Everett Heights saying like, hey, I want to sponsor a kid on the Police Adventure League.
Yeah.
Or maybe you'll have, another nonprofit and like, oh, I'm trying to organize a backpacking trip and trying to find backpacks and things like that of like, no, like we'll go with Peak 7, pay what we can, afford, and have an amazing first-rate experience. And so I just think just connecting word of mouth, either working with a youth organization, and we work with youth, but we work with a lot of different youth groups. So our heart is under-resourced populations, but we work with like church groups or different youth, and they'll still have, like, it's easy to say like, oh, you have, an under-resourced or inner city kid, and like you must have a really tough story. But there's a lot of hurt and a lot of tough stories with kids who would normally seem pretty well off.
Yeah.
And so like some of the more challenging kids have been, kids who have pretty well off backgrounds, but have a lot of hurt and they need to be able to process and work through.
Yeah.
So it is different, but we do work with a lot of different youth groups, not just under-resourced.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So if an organization has interest, what's the best way for them to contact you? Go to the website and email you guys?
There's a form on the website, just interested of like, hey, wow, I'd love that for my youth or the kids in my neighborhood, or just even a teacher. Like we'll have a teacher want to take their students, or for Pat, a police officer who wants to take kids from his school, and just be able to provide those lasting connections within the community or deepen those connections and come alongside someone else. Like, yeah, we don't have like follow up and mentoring, but we're coming alongside like, hey, guides who first, care about the kids. I think the other thing I'd like to share is just our awesome guides. Like they could be doing a lot over the summer. It's a lot to compete with. And and we'll train the right person. Like I'm going to take a school counselor who doesn't know how to be a raft guide, maybe over a raft guide who doesn't understand like working with kids sometimes. Not all, but I had an interview one time of like, okay, you have a someone in a community of color and they're absolutely terrified of a whitewater rafting trip. What are you going to do? And I'm like, this is my first time. I'm freaked out too. And like high-fiving, like, oh, maybe trying to find, I can't train, I can train the outdoor skills. It takes more to train the people
interpersonal skills.
And so I have, this year, 2 of my staff are teachers and things like that. Very green guides in the outdoors, but love kids, know how to work with them, love the Lord. So
it's the interpersonal skills are very important, obviously, in what you're doing. And like you said, you can teach those other skills. Interpersonal skills they have to come from a place from the heart, really, to engage.
Like knowing when to, like when someone else like, hey, how do you know when a student is at their limit? What's a perceived limit and what's a real limit? And like, okay, let's not go for that summit today. Let's just hang out at camp and have solo time where like, man, I really think you can do this. Let's go for it. I know you can do this. And it's like, it's experience. You have to have that experience, and you have to make some small mistakes, hopefully small mistakes. In working with people, you need that experience. You can't just take a class. Even with the outdoors, we'll, instead of like, hey, at this level you do this, at this level you do this, on the training and the outdoor training with our guides, it's like, this is what this is at, and so they're in it. And like, we probably wouldn't want to have kids in this situation. So going above and beyond where we would take kids so they can experience where you wouldn't want to be with kids. Okay. And just how to think. That's not just what to do, but how to think in the outdoors. But lots of things. But
and for donations, is that just through the website as well?
Yeah.
If you want to donate to Peak 7? And that's peak7.org. PEAK 7, the number, .org. And I'll share that in the show's information and links and everything so that people can easily access your website from the podcast. Is there anything else you'd like to share, Austin?
No, thank you so much. I really appreciate just being able to share and process and stuff like that. So I'm glad to reach out and glad you could go on the trip too.
Thank you for having me. That was a really, really cool time. And the water fights we had out there were awesome.
It's fun watching people like just laugh and play together. It's great.
That group was awesome we went with. All right. Well, we'll wrap it up. Okay. That chapter is with Austin Dannen from Peak 7. I'm your host, Bobby J, and this is City Chapters Podcast.